She was on her knees when he walked in. Later, Lieutenant Marcus Holt would tell people that the first time he laid eyes on Alara Voss, she was literally kneeling on the floor of the bullpen, and he would laugh when he said it, the kind of laugh that was meant to communicate something about the natural order of things. The way some people were made to kneel, and others to stand above them. What he would not mention, because he genuinely did not notice, or perhaps because noticing would have required him to pay attention to something other than himself, was that she was retrieving a classified field manual that had slipped from her desk, that she did not look up at the sound of his footsteps, that her right hand, resting on the floor tile for balance, was positioned exactly 3 inches from an emergency call button embedded under the edge of her desk, a feature that, according to the base's official blueprints, did not exist. But Marcus Holt was not the kind of man who read blueprints. He was the kind of man who read the room and decided he owned it. He smiled. He straightened his cap. He had absolutely no idea what was about to happen to him. Fort Aldridge's 7th Tactical Operations Center was not, by any measurable standard, a prestigious posting. It sat 40 minutes outside of a mid-sized city on the high plains, on a stretch of land that the Army had acquired in 1943 and never quite figured out what to do with since. The main building was a converted logistics hub, 3 floors of fluorescent lighting, institutional carpeting in a shade of green that had no name in any natural language, and the particular ambient hum of too many computers running too many programs in rooms with inadequate ventilation. The intelligence analysis bullpen occupied most of the 2nd floor. It housed 23 personnel of varying rank and temperament, a coffee machine that had been broken in 3 different ways simultaneously since April, and one very large wall map of a region that most of the people looking at it could not publicly admit they were looking at. Alara Voss arrived on a Tuesday. She arrived at 0812 hours, 12 minutes before her official report time of 0824, which was itself an oddly specific time that no one had questioned because it appeared on her transfer paperwork in the same officious font as everything else. She wore her uniform correctly, but unremarkably. Her hair was regulation. Her face was the kind of face that was easy to not quite remember. Symmetrical, pleasant, notable only in that it managed to be completely unnotable. She was 27 years old and looked, depending on the light, somewhere between 22 and 32. She introduced herself to the duty sergeant, signed the required forms, was shown to her desk, a corner position near the filing room, away from the windows, and immediately began arranging her workspace with the unhurried efficiency of someone who knew exactly where they wanted everything and exactly why. Sergeant First Class Jonah Reyes was the first to notice the absence of the usual new arrival awkwardness. Most new transfers spent at least the first morning looking slightly lost. They would misread the printer cue, get the coffee machine's temperament wrong, take the wrong bathroom key. Voss did none of these things. She navigated the floor as if she had memorized its layout from a satellite photograph, which, Reyes would later reflect, was probably exactly what she had done. She asked no questions. She made no errors. She was at her desk, working, at 0817. Transfer from Fort Benedict? He asked, leaning over with the particular friendliness of an NCO performing a social assessment. That's right, she said, without looking up. Admin specialist. Grade 3. He waited for her to offer more. She didn't. I'm Sergeant Reyes. I run the floor day to day. She looked up then, and her eyes, a gray that was almost colorless in the fluorescent light, met his with a directness that was not unfriendly but was also, somehow, not quite the deference he was used to from new arrivals. I know, she said. Good to meet you, Sergeant. She knew his name. He had not given it. Reyes went back to his desk and spent about 40 seconds wondering how she'd known his name, and then the printer jammed, and he forgot about it. By 1100 hours, Alara Voss had processed 3 weeks of backlogged administrative files, identified and corrected 4 data entry errors in the regional deployment tracker, and quietly reorganized the filing system in a way that would save the office approximately 40 minutes per day, though no one would trace this improvement to her for weeks. She had also, without appearing to do anything more than occasionally glance up from her screen, cataloged the desk arrangement of every person on the floor, noted which 3 personnel accessed the high-clearance server terminal most frequently, and identified the location of every security camera blind spot in the bullpen. She was halfway through a standardized logistics report when Lieutenant Marcus Holt arrived. He came in the way he always came in, door swinging wide, stride confident, the particular body language of a man who believes his entrance changes the atmosphere of a room. Which, to be fair, it did. Not in the way he imagined, but it did. Conversations shortened. Body language tightened. Private Theo Marsh, 19 years old and still figuring out which fork went where at formal dinners, suddenly became very interested in his keyboard. Holt was 34, fit in the way that came more from a gym than from field work, and possessed of the kind of handsome that had clearly been the central organizing fact of his personality for about 20 years. He was the son of Major General Victor Holt, and he wore this fact as invisibly and inescapably as his own skeleton. Every career decision above his pay grade that had ever gone his way was traceable, if you knew where to look, to a phone call his father had made or a favor his father was owed. He did not think of this as unfair. He thought of it as how the world worked for people like him. He did not know, standing in the doorway of the 7th TOC bullpen on that particular Tuesday morning, that he was about to spend the next 3 weeks systematically dismantling his own life. Or that the woman in the corner desk, who had not looked up from her screen, was going to help him do it. He spotted Alara immediately, or rather, he spotted the unfamiliar face, which in the bullpen social ecology was a small but notable event. He walked over. "New," he said. "Yes, sir," she said, still not looking up. He waited. She continued typing. "I'm Lieutenant Holt, Intelligence Section Chief." "I know, sir." There was that again. The knowledge without the explanation. He studied her, the neat desk, the plain face, the absolute absence of the flutter that his introductions usually produced in female subordinates. Something about her stillness was faintly irritating, like a radio signal that wouldn't quite tune in. "What section are you?" "Administrative support." He lost interest approximately as fast as he had gained it. "Administrative. Right." He nodded, already half turned away, already recalibrating her significance to approximately 0. "Get settled," he said, the way you'd say it to furniture. "Already settled, sir," she said. He left. He did not look back. Alara Voss watched his reflection in her dark monitor screen until he reached his desk. Then she returned to her logistics report, and the faint line at the corner of her mouth that was not quite a smile disappeared as if it had never been there. It happened on Thursday. In retrospect, which was a country that Marcus Holt would come to inhabit extensively in the following weeks. Thursday was the day the trajectory of his career began its final, irrevocable arc toward the ground. But at the time, it felt like an ordinary Thursday, which was to say it felt like an opportunity. The bullpen was full. That was important. Holt was, at his core, a performance artist, and performances required audiences. He had Priya Anand from Signals Intelligence, 3 junior analysts, Private Marsh, and Sergeant Reyes all within earshot when he stopped at Alara's desk. She was on the phone, a landline, the encrypted line that ran through the secure communications trunk, speaking in what sounded like quiet, rapid-fire something. Not English. Holt paused, trying to identify the language, and failed, which annoyed him more than he expected. She held up one finger, one moment, without looking at him, still speaking into the receiver. He felt the temperature of his own mood drop approximately 4 degrees. He waited. 12 seconds. 15. She was still talking. "Hey." He snapped his fingers. Actually snapped them, the sharp single crack of someone summoning an animal. "I'm standing here." She ended the call. Smoothly, with a short phrase and what sounded like a formal sign-off. She set the receiver down, aligned it with the edge of her desk with a precision that seemed somehow deliberate, and looked up at him with an expression of polite, complete attention. "Yes, sir." "What language was that?" "Administrative coordination, sir." "That's not." He stopped. He had, for a moment, forgotten what he'd come over for. He recovered. "The coffee machine on this floor is broken." "I'm aware, sir. Maintenance has been notified. Estimated repair is." "The one on the 3rd floor works," he said. "I take mine black, 2 sugars. Large cup." Silence. It lasted perhaps 3 seconds. In the context of the bullpen, in that moment, 3 seconds felt like a geological epoch. Priya Anand looked up from her terminal. Private Marsh appeared to be holding his breath. Reyes, across the room, went very still. Alara looked at Holt. Her expression did not change. "Sir," she said, "I'm in the middle of a time-sensitive." "I'm not asking for your scheduling priorities," he said. and his voice had gone to the place it went when he wanted to remind people of the space between their rank and his. I'm asking for a coffee. Your admin support. Support this. He let the pause sit, the particular pause of a man who has learned, over many years, that silence serves him. Then he added, with a smile that had teeth in it, "They're a problem, little rookie." He didn't use the other word. Not quite. Not in a way that could be directly quoted in a formal complaint. But it was in the room the way smoke is in a room after a fire. You couldn't see it, but you could feel it in your lungs. The junior analysts found things to look at. Priya Anand's jaw had gone tight. Private Marsh stared at his keyboard with the intensity of a man attempting telekinesis. Alara Voss looked at Holt for one more second. Then she stood up. She was not tall, 5'4", perhaps 5'5". Standing, she was half a head shorter than him and maybe 130 pounds. She should have looked diminished by the standing, made smaller by proximity to his rank and his certainty and his carefully constructed aura of command. Instead, Reyes would later try to explain to his wife, she looked like someone switching something on. "Of course, sir," she said. Her voice was perfectly, almost musically level. "Black, 2 sugars, large cup." She walked past him toward the door. Holt watched her go with the satisfaction of a man who has correctly identified the natural order of things and been proven right about it. He did not notice that she had, before standing, closed the folder on her desk. Carefully, precisely, but not completely. She had left one corner open. Just enough. He came back that night at 21:30. This was not unusual for Holt. He occasionally returned to the office after hours, less from professional dedication than from the value of being seen to work late, which was a different thing entirely. Tonight was genuinely practical. He had left his personal access card in his desk drawer and needed it for an early morning meeting. The bullpen was empty. Emergency lighting only. The hum of servers, the faint tick of the climate system, the particular quality of silence that an office develops at night when it relaxes into what it actually is. He was halfway to his desk when he saw it. Alara Voss's workstation was neat. Everything put away, screen locked, chair pushed in at a precise 90-degree angle. Except for one thing. A manila-tan folder, sitting slightly open on the right side of her desk. He wouldn't have noticed it except that the edge of one document inside had slipped out, and the paper had a color-coded bar across the top that he recognized immediately. Black and red diagonal stripe, 2 inches wide. The kind of marking that appeared on documents above classification level 6, above secret, above top secret, into a category that technically had no common name because officially it did not publicly exist. He stopped. He looked at the hallway door. Empty corridor, dim emergency light. He looked at the camera. He'd been walking this bullpen for 18 months. He knew exactly where every camera pointed. The corner desk was in a blind spot, a fact he had filed away once, casually, and now registered with an entirely new significance. He crossed to her desk. He lifted the folder. Inside, an operational dossier. 8 pages. The first was a standard summary sheet of the type used by Tier 1 intelligence units. At the top, in plain type, was a single word that served as a code name, Ghost. Below it, a small black and white subject photograph. Head and shoulders, the face of a woman who looked like she might work in an office somewhere and be easy to forget. He looked at the photograph for 3 seconds before he recognized the face. Then he read. He read for 11 minutes, standing at her desk in the dark office. He read the entire dossier twice. When he finally set the folder down, his hands were not quite steady. Ghost. Operational call sign, Captain Alara M. Voss, Black Operations Division, Joint Special Access Program. Currently assigned to Project Meridian, status active. 6 verified primary operations over an 8-year career, 3 of them listed in the dossier's operational summary in the same clinical shorthand used for major military engagements. He recognized 2 of the operation names. They had appeared briefly in classified internal briefings as incidents conducted by assets unknown. He had assumed assets unknown meant a team. Probably a significant team. It meant her. She was 27 years old. There was a commendation in the folder, a personal letter from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, dated 18 months ago. He read the language. Extraordinary valor under conditions that would have broken most operators, 3 times her senior. Her conduct has, on multiple occasions, been the sole determining factor between mission success and catastrophic loss of life. He read the current assignment line. Project Meridian. Objective, Internal Security Audit, 7th Tactical Operations Center. Suspected intelligence compromise resulting in 3 asset losses. Authorized access, all levels. The air in the room felt different. Thinner. He put the folder back. He aligned it carefully with the edge of the desk, exactly where he'd found it, as close as he could manage. He stepped back. He walked to his own desk, collected his access card, and left. In the elevator, alone, he leaned against the wall and stared at the closed doors. Administrative support, she'd said. Grade 3, she'd said. Of course, sir. Black, 2 sugars, large cup. He thought about the phone call he'd interrupted, the language he hadn't recognized. He thought about 3 dead agents in a project called Meridian and the phrase Internal Security Audit, 7th TOC. He thought about what he had done 3 months ago when his father had called and asked him to pass some routing information through private channels. The elevator reached the ground floor. The doors opened. He walked to his car. He sat in it for a long time without starting the engine. He started with the obvious. The military personnel database, accessible at his clearance level, which was level 5 and considerable, returned exactly 1 result for VOS, Alara M. The transfer record he already knew. Photo matched. Rank, Specialist. Posting history, Fort Benedict, 18 months, administrative support. Before Fort Benedict, nothing. Not redacted, nothing. A service record that simply began at Fort Benedict as if she had been manufactured there at the age of 25, with a complete administrative history and no origin. He tried the secondary database, the one that required an additional authentication step that most officers at his level didn't know existed. He knew about it because his father had told him, years ago, in the way fathers pass on useful tools. He entered his credentials. The system ran for 6 seconds. Then, inquiry recorded. Access denied. Clearance level insufficient. His clearance level was level 5. The information on Alara Voss was classified at a level his clearance could not touch. He closed the terminal and sat at his desk, aware of a cold, spreading sensation that he associated with the specific experience of walking somewhere confidently and stepping off an edge you didn't know was there. He was careful for the rest of the day. Careful in the way that people are careful when they suddenly understand that they are being watched, and that the watching has been going on for much longer than they knew. He found himself reassessing moments. The previous week, the week before that. Had she been in any briefings he'd attended? Had she had access to his terminal logs? Did she know? Of course she knew. That was the point. That was what internal security audit meant. She was here because of him. The question that kept sliding into his mind and then away from it, the one he did not want to sit with, was whether she had already found what she was looking for. He thought about the routing information. It had seemed so minor at the time. His father had explained it as an interdepartmental efficiency measure, a way of getting time-sensitive communications through the bureaucratic backlog faster, through his father's private office rather than through the standard channels that could take days. It had not occurred to Holt to question it. His father was a major general. His father understood these systems. But the dossier had said 3 assets lost. 3 people dead. People who might have been in the region covered by that routing information. People whose operational security might have been fatally compromised by intelligence moving through unofficial, unsecured channels to an office that had no operational need for it. He sat at his desk, surrounded by the ordinary noise of the bullpen, and looked at the back of Alara Voss's head 2 rows ahead of him. She was typing at her usual steady pace. She had a small cup of coffee at her elbow. She'd gotten it herself, apparently, from the 3rd floor, appearing at her desk at 0930 with it, as if it had materialized from the air. She did not look around. She did not look at him. She looked like someone with nothing to hide and nothing to fear and nothing on her mind except her work. He had never, in his life, been more frightened of another human being. Jonah Reyes noticed on Friday. It was a small thing, the kind of thing you'd dismiss if you weren't constitutionally inclined toward noticing small things, which Reyes was, having spent 8 years as an NCO accumulating the working knowledge that small things are what large things are made of. The small thing was this: Alara Voss, retrieving a document from the filing room, past the high-clearance server terminal at 1,413 hours. She did not stop. She did not pause. She did not look at it directly. But her head tilted, almost imperceptibly, no more than 2 or 3 degrees, at precisely the angle that would place the terminal's activity light in her peripheral vision, and her walking pace adjusted by perhaps a quarter step in the interval. She had clocked the terminal's status without appearing to look at it. Reyes had done that exact thing himself, in a different context, in a country he was not permitted to name, trained as an intelligence-capable field observer during a deployment that was not on his official record. He started paying attention. Over the following 2 days, he collected observations the way other people collected grievances, methodically, without quite deciding to. Her typing speed in English was approximately 90 words per minute, which was fast. On 2 occasions he had briefly glimpsed her screen when she was working on what appeared to be documents in other languages. Once what he thought was Arabic, once something with a different script entirely. Both times, the same speed. People who were genuinely fluent in multiple languages at the level of professional documentation did not produce the same typing speed across all of them unless they thought in all of them with equal, native facility. She had taken 2 phone calls in the supply room rather than at her desk. Both times she was back within 6 minutes. Both times she returned with the particular settled quality of someone who has just received information, processed it, and integrated it into an existing framework. On Wednesday morning, Holt had knocked over a water cup while reaching across his desk, sending a stream of water directly toward a junior analyst's equipment. In the 11 seconds of chaos that followed, 4 people jumping up, 2 grabbing materials, voices overlapping, Alara Voss had not moved from her desk. Not because she was uninvested. She had looked up, assessed the threat, observed the junior analyst moving to intercept the flow, and returned to her screen before the analyst finished redirecting the water. Her threat assessment and response cycle operated at a speed that was not normal for an administrative specialist. It was not normal for most people, in any context. On Thursday afternoon, Reyes placed a folder in an incorrect tray, a small filing error, deliberately introduced, to see what would happen. She corrected it at 15:45 without comment, without pausing, placing it in the correct tray as she passed. She did not know he was watching. Or, a thought that arrived later and was considerably colder. She knew, and was not concerned, because she had already decided he was not a problem. That night, Reyes called his former unit commander from his personal phone, from his car, in the parking lot. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. He mentioned a name. His former commander was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Where did you hear that name?" Reyes said, "She's sitting 12 feet from me." Another pause. Longer. "Reyes, listen to me carefully. You did not hear this from me. But that woman does not need your protection. You understand? She does not need anyone's protection. If she comes to you, your only job is to do what she says when she says it without asking questions. Can you do that?" He said he could. He went back to the office the next morning and looked at Alara Voss with an entirely new framework for understanding what he was looking at. She was at her desk, processing a logistics report, looking perfectly ordinary. He thought, 3 dead agents. He thought, 27 years old. He thought, with a degree of reflective discomfort, that he should probably reconsider several of the assumptions he'd been making about how the world worked since approximately 1997. The call came at 0213 on a Sunday morning. Alara was awake. She had been awake, working through an encrypted cipher decode on a device that looked like an aging e-reader, when her secured communication line activated. She answered before the second pulse. Ghost. The voice was female, mid-range, deliberately neutral. The voice of someone trained to convey information without conveying anything beyond information. Ren. We have confirmation on the trace. Access logs, secondary communications trunk, 7th TOC. The leak is identified. Formal documentation complete and authenticated. Alara set down the e-reader. In the darkness of her temporary quarters, the only light was the faint standby glow of her secure devices and the ambient pale of a winter sky through the blind. Timeline. 3 months, for weeks, 2 days from initial compromise to asset losses. 14 data packets transmitted through unauthorized channels. Recipient, the Private Communications Office of Major General Victor Holt. Source access. Single personnel ID. Level 5 clearance. 7th TOC Intelligence Section access logs are unambiguous. A pause that was precisely as long as necessary and not 1 beat longer. Lieutenant Marcus Holt. Your current installation's Intel section chief. She already knew. She had known for 12 days. But confirmation was different from knowing. Confirmation was the lock clicking shut, the mechanism completing itself, the case becoming a fact rather than a conclusion. Evidence integrity. Airtight. Chain of custody documented through NSA timestamp authentication. JAG has reviewed preliminary findings. They're ready to move when you signal. The father, Victor Holt's direct involvement is currently designated probable, but not yet meeting the threshold for criminal prosecution. He will be implicated. Whether that rises to a charge is above our pay grades. Alara was quiet for a moment. 3 agents, she said. Yes. Names. Ren gave them. She already knew them. She had known them. 1 closely, 2 by professional acquaintance. The particular acquaintance that develops between people who work in darkness and are careful never to know too much about each other, so that what they don't know can't be extracted. She was quiet for a moment that Ren had the operational wisdom not to fill. Tomorrow, Alara said. I'll send the activation signal by 1800. Copy that, Ghost. The line closed. She sat in the dark and thought about 3 people who had gone into the field carrying intelligence that had already been sold before they arrived. Who had done their jobs correctly. Who had died because someone had passed routing information through private channels, probably without understanding what he was doing, or understanding and not quite caring enough to stop, or caring in the abstract, but letting the gravitational weight of his father's voice override the abstract. It didn't matter which. The outcomes were the same. She thought about Thursday in the bullpen. The snap of fingers. Fetch my coffee, little rookie. The faces of the junior personnel watching. The tight jaw of Priya Anand. The rigid keyboard staring of Private Marsh. All the small, daily acts of witness that people were forced to perform when power exercised itself in small moments as a kind of practice. She picked up the e-reader and returned to the cipher decode. She had work to finish before morning. He caught her in the hallway outside the supply room on Monday afternoon. Holt had spent the preceding week rebuilding himself into something that resembled confidence. He had decided, because this was what he did, what he had always done, that the correct response to a threat was to move toward it, to take control of the narrative, to be the one doing the defining rather than the one being defined. This approach had served him for 34 years. He saw no reason to revise it now. It was, in retrospect, perhaps the most complete expression of everything that was wrong with how he understood the world. Voss. He said her name the way you say a door handle, not because you're interested in it, but because you need it to open. She stopped, turned, looked at him with the gray eyes that he'd been failing to read for 2 weeks. Lieutenant, I need a word. I have 5 minutes before a scheduled call. This won't take 5 minutes. He checked the hallway. Empty, both directions. He lowered his voice to the register of conspiracy. I know who you are. She looked at him. I saw the file, he said. On your desk. I know about Project Meridian. I know why you're here. He watched her face for a reaction. There was none. He pushed forward. I want you to understand something. What happened with the communications, the routing, that was authorized. My father authorized it. It was an approved interdepartmental efficiency. Lieutenant. Her voice was quiet, not unkind. Precise in the way a scalpel is precise, not designed to hurt more than necessary, designed to do exactly what is required. I'd like you to stop talking. I'm not going to. You are describing, in an unsecured hallway, your knowledge of a classified black operations project and your personal involvement in an active intelligence compromise investigation that has documented 3 fatalities. She tilted her head, fractionally. You understand that this conversation is a second offense being appended to the primary case file, in real time. He stared at her. The file on your desk, he said. You left it open on purpose. I left a folder open, she said. What you chose to do with that folder was entirely your decision. You were baiting me. I was providing an opportunity, she said, for someone who was going to make poor choices to make them in a context where those choices could be documented and prosecuted cleanly. She paused, 1 beat. You've been attempting to access my service record through 7 different database queries over the past 6 days. Every inquiry was logged. I appreciate the thoroughness. It establishes a pattern of awareness of wrongdoing that will be materially useful in the formal proceedings. The word proceedings hit him like stepping into water that was much colder than expected. You can't, he stopped. He shifted registers. moved to the one that had always worked, the bedrock of his entire navigational system. He drew himself up. He let the weight of his father's name occupy the space around him. My father is a 2-star general. You are a captain on a field posting. You do not have the authority to. I have a signed operational mandate from the Joint Chiefs of Staff authorizing me to identify, document, and recommend prosecution for any personnel at this installation found to have compromised classified intelligence resulting in asset loss. She reached into her breast pocket and produced a small laminated card, bearing a code sequence and an authentication seal that he recognized from the highest-level briefings he had ever attended, the ones where phones were surrendered at the door. She held it at a distance he could read it from. The rank of the personnel involved is not a limiting factor in this mandate. In the presence of the specific offenses documented here, it is an aggravating one. She returned the card to her pocket. I'm going to go make my call now, she said. I'd suggest you use the time to contact your personal legal counsel, not your father's counsel. Yours. She turned and walked away down the hallway. She did not walk quickly or slowly. She did not look back. He stood in the empty corridor and watched her go. And for the first time in his adult life, he felt the specific sensation of a door closing. Not metaphorically, not emotionally, but concretely, mechanically, the way a vault door closes, with weight and with finality, and with the particular sound of a lock engaging on the other side. She turned the corner and was gone. From somewhere above him, the 3rd floor, he could hear, very faintly, the coffee machine beginning its cycle. Colonel Diana Marsh called the review board for 1,400 hours on Wednesday. She had been briefed on Project Meridian 6 weeks before Ilara Voss arrived at the 7th TOC. A brief, precise, eyes-only communication telling her that a senior Black Operations Division investigator would be arriving undercover, that her role was to provide standard administrative cover, and that she was to convene a formal review process upon receiving the activation signal. She had not been told who the investigator was. She had not asked. This was how these things worked. When she met Ilara Voss officially for the first time, in a private briefing at 0800 on the morning of the board, she spent approximately 30 seconds revising a number of assumptions she had made about what this meeting would look like. The woman sitting across from her desk looked 25. Her uniform was in perfect order. She had brought, in a small professional briefcase, a documentation package that was the most methodically complete intelligence prosecution file Marsh had encountered in 30 years of service. It had color-coded tabs. Captain Voss, Marsh said. Colonel, your documentation is in order. It is. You're aware General Holt has been notified and is flying in personally. Expected, Voss said. His presence will be useful. It places his documented involvement in the same room as the documentation. Marsh studied her for a moment. You understand his son is looking at significant criminal charges. 3 people died, Colonel. A pause in which several things that did not need to be said were mutually acknowledged. Yes, Marsh said. They did. Conference room A at 1,400 hours held. Colonel Marsh, the 7th TOC legal officer, a JAG representative who had arrived by early flight, 2 senior intelligence officers from Regional Command, and Captain Ilara Voss, seated at the far end of the table with her briefcase and a single glass of water. Lieutenant Marcus Holt entered with his father. Major General Victor Holt was 62 years old, silver-haired, and possessed of the specific gravitational authority of a man who had spent 4 decades accumulating institutional weight. He entered the room the way he had entered every room for 20 years, as the dominant element, the fixed point around which everything else arranged itself. He wore his uniform the way generals wear uniforms, which is to say like a fact. He looked at the assembled faces. His gaze moved across Ilara Voss without pausing. He sat. His son sat beside him, his hands flat on the table. Victor Holt opened. He had clearly prepared remarks. Measured, authoritative, preemptive. The routing communications, he said, were part of an authorized interdepartmental efficiency initiative. His son had acted entirely in good faith upon guidance from a superior officer, himself. The question of operational casualties, he said, was a complex matter of multiple concurrent factors entirely unrelated to. General Holt, said Colonel Marsh. He stopped. She looked to the far end of the table. Captain Voss. Ilara opened the briefcase. She placed 3 documentation packages on the table, one to each senior reviewer. With the unhurried precision of someone performing a task they have performed completely, mentally, many times before it became physical. Then she reached into her breast pocket and placed 2 items in front of Colonel Marsh: the laminated card with the authentication seal, and behind it, a formal operational authorization letter from the director of the Joint Special Access Program. The JAG officer picked up his documentation package and began reading. The regional intelligence officers did the same. The room settled into the specific quality of silence that exists when powerful people are reading something that is changing their understanding of a situation in real time. Victor Holt was also reading, more slowly, with the deliberate care of a man encountering, for the first time, information assembled by someone more thorough than himself, which was, for Victor Holt, a novel experience, and not a comfortable one. Marcus Holt was not reading. He was looking at Alara Voss. She met his gaze once, briefly, with an expression that was neither hostile nor sympathetic, simply factual, the way a witness is factual. Then she turned to address Colonel Marsh, which was the appropriate protocol, and began presenting the case. She was methodical. She was precise. She used no inflammatory language and offered no editorial commentary. She presented 14 documented communications with NS-authenticated timestamps, a complete and unbroken chain of custody record, and cross-referenced field reports from each of the 3 compromised operations, each one demonstrating the direct causal line between the intelligence leak, the unauthorized transmission, and the asset losses. She named the 3 agents. She gave their operational dates of death. She gave their contributions to prior missions. She said their names with the same precision she applied to every other word, but she said them twice. It took 42 minutes. When she finished, the room was quiet in a way that rooms are rarely quiet. Not the quiet of waiting, but the quiet of arrival. Victor Holt said, "Captain, I believe there are contextual factors that have not been." "General," said the JAG officer, without looking up from his documents, "given that your private communications office appears as the documented recipient of 14 transmissions of compartmented intelligence, I would strongly advise you to discontinue any statements in this room until you have spoken with counsel." He turned a page. "Your own counsel, not your office's." Victor Holt's face moved through several transformations in quick succession. None of them were ones he would have chosen to be witnessed. Marcus Holt said nothing. He had said nothing for 42 minutes. He sat with his hands flat on the table and looked at the documentation in front of him. The pages, the timestamps, the names, with the expression of someone who has been searching, for a long time, for an alternative version of events and has finally understood that no such version exists. After the room cleared, after the generals and legal officers and regional command representatives had filed out in various states of controlled devastation, after the documentation had been formally collected and signed for, after the record of proceedings had been initiated, Alara Voss was alone in conference room A with Sergeant Reyes, who had been posted at the door per operational protocol and entered afterward to assist with logistics. He stood in the middle of the room. He looked at her. She was closing her briefcase. "Captain," he said. It was the first time he had used the rank aloud. It felt like something finally fitting correctly. "Sergeant." 3 agents, he said. She looked up. "Yes." "Did you know them?" A pause that gave him the answer before the words did. "1. Closely enough." He nodded slowly. He stacked a chair. "For what it's worth, I knew something was off about you from your first day." The faintest edge of something appeared at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, but in the neighborhood of one. "I know. You were surprisingly subtle about it." "High praise," he said. "From me?" she said. Genuinely. He almost smiled back. "What happens now?" She picked up her briefcase. "Formal investigation. Courts-martial proceedings, in all likelihood. Victor Holt will probably avoid criminal charges. There's enough separation in the record for his legal team to work with. Marcus carries the primary weight." She paused. "The 3 agents get proper records. Their files get closed correctly. And you?" She moved toward the door. "Next posting." "Already. There's always a next posting." She left. Reyes stood in the empty room for a long moment. Then he stacked the last chair, turned off the light, and went to update his own transfer paperwork. She left on a Friday, which was fitting, because she had arrived on a Tuesday and nothing about her time at the 7th TOC had followed an expected pattern. She had 1 bag, the same one she'd arrived with. She signed her release paperwork at 0800, shook Colonel Marsh's hand in a grip that Marsh would describe to her executive officer as like shaking hands with certainty, and submitted her administrative ID badge. Marsh held the badge for a moment. Administrative Specialist, Grade 3. The photograph. Neat, plain, easy to forget. Keep it, Marsh said, offering it back. You've earned some irony. Alara looked at the badge for a moment. She put it in her pocket. The bullpen was at partial capacity when she passed through. Early Friday, half the staff in briefings. Private Theo Marsh stood up when she entered, then sat back down, caught between a dozen conflicting impulses about the appropriate protocol for acknowledging someone whose rank had been retroactively revealed to be approximately 6 levels above what he believed. At ease, Private, she said. He sat. She crossed the bullpen to the coffee machine. The one on this floor. The one that had been broken since April and had been repaired on Tuesday afternoon by a maintenance request that she had filed. The one she had never been permitted to use because a man had sent her to a different floor for his order. She took a paper cup from the stack. She filled it. Black. 2 sugars. Large. She carried it across the floor. She set it on Lieutenant Holt's desk. His desk, which had been cleared of all personal effects when he was placed under formal investigation pending courts-martial proceedings, which held nothing now but a locked terminal and a nameplate that would be replaced within the week. An empty desk in an ordinary office, in a building that buzzed and hummed with the low-grade electricity of institutional life continuing forward, indifferent. She set the coffee down, precisely in the center of the desk blotter. She looked at it for a moment. The steam rising slowly in the fluorescent light, the small curl of vapor disappearing into the recycled air. Then she picked up her bag and walked to the elevator. In the elevator, Sergeant Reyes caught up with her, slightly out of breath, carrying a box of personal effects from his desk and holding a set of transfer orders under his arm. She looked at him, at the box, at the orders. Reassignment, he said, slightly defensive. Received this morning. Project Meridian. Field Support Unit. He paused. Someone apparently put my name on the roster. She looked at him for a long moment. Someone who knows what she's doing, he added. That remains to be evaluated, she said. The elevator opened. They walked out into the morning. Clean air, the high plains winter, a sky that was pale and flat and very wide. The kind of sky that reminded you the world was larger than any building you'd been inside. You're going to have to keep up, she said. I'm aware, he said. I mean that practically. I assumed you did. She nodded once. She put on her sunglasses. She walked to the car. He stood on the step for a moment and looked back at the building, at the fluorescent second-floor windows, at the flag moving in the winter wind, at the ordinary institutional face of a place where something significant had just quietly, irrevocably happened. Then he picked up his box and went to find his car. 6 months later. A different facility. A different state. A different bullpen with a different color of institutional carpeting. This one a shade of beige that had no more name in any natural language than the green at the 7th TOC. The new posting had 41 personnel. A working coffee machine. A wall map of a region that the people looking at it could not publicly acknowledge they were looking at. And one new arrival. A Tuesday morning, 1 bag. Unremarkable face. A corner desk near the filing room. A new captain. Young. Fit in the way that came more from a gym than from field work, comfortable with the way his rank arranged the room. Looked up from his desk and noticed the unfamiliar face. He crossed the floor. New, he said. Administrative support, she said, without looking up. Grade 3. He looked her up and down with the assessment of a man who had decided something before he finished deciding it. Good, he said. Coffee machine's on your left. I take mine with cream, 2 sugars. In the far corner of the room, SGT. First Class Jonah Reyes, newly transferred, taking the desk assignment he'd been given, unpacking with the methodical ease of a man who had done this many times before, pinched the bridge of his nose, closed his eyes, began quietly counting. 10. She was going to handle this herself. She always did. 9. 8. But it was going to be a very interesting month.